I think we can imagine another approach. And if we take the premise that the brain is sort of paramount to how we operate in the world and how we interact with the world, how we make decisions, etc., can we think about a form of stakeholder capitalism which focuses on brain issues? So can we think about stakeholder capitalism, which, as we know, is this approach to broadening out the stakeholders that we care about in the economy, not just thinking about shareholders and monetary return, but thinking about the environment, thinking about employees of companies, thinking about citizens, civic society, etc. Can we start with stakeholder capitalism, and then can we tune it towards issues of the brain that we think are so central? So can we, when we develop products and services, can we assess these products and services in a way, what are they doing good for the brain? Let's optimize what they're doing that's good for the brain. And how can we mitigate what's bad for the brain? Let's take plastics. We don't know what plastics are doing to the brain because the current capitalist system, the current economic thinking doesn't really care about that so much. It doesn't track and hold itself accountable to this, but there is an emerging literature around the effect of microplastics on our brains. And it's a totally new area of science that needs to be rapidly understood. And if it is determined that microplastics, which we know can get into the brains of rodents in neuroscience studies and certainly in fish in the ocean, if we determine that microplastics perhaps are getting into the human brain, well, we need to do something about that. We need to recognize that that product of that certain type of plastic is very toxic and hazardous to the brain, and it's potentially having all sorts of negative first, second, and third order effects on our brains and on our economy. It can affect our ability to think, and disease progression, etc. could be accelerating these issues. So that's one example of where a brain-based stakeholder capitalism could help us to think through the effect of products and services on our brains. And then companies, how do we make sure that companies are protecting the brain health of their employees? And I've been glad to see organizations like SASB and ISO are developing standards for human capital and brain capital of employees of corporations. So if we can start to sort of impose maybe a little bit of light regulation, or at least guidelines for companies, maybe that these companies can start to look after their employees more. Then there are other examples of investment funds, big, there's trillions of dollars of capital in the world. How do we try to help to ensure that that capital that's being invested around the world is being channeled in a way that is, good for the human brain, that is beneficial to the human brain? Can we work with organizations like the PRI, the Principles for Responsible Investing, to develop standards and guidelines to ensure that when an investment is made, that it is made in a company that is having a beneficial effect on the brains of their employees, the products and services that they generate can have a beneficial effect on the brain. So these are some of the things that I think we could do if we're conceptualizing a brain-focused, a pro-brain version of stakeholder capitalism.
Well, thanks, Harris. And your plastic example is a good example of what we're talking about here, because it's estimated that we consume about 250 grams of plastic every year, which is a heaped dinner plate's worth of shredded plastic. And we take consumption and production decisions as largely being independent of what those decisions will do to us, to our health. And again, because as you said, these are externalities, but actually probably shapes our health and our behavior in ways that we haven't really considered. And so the big lesson for me is that we operate within an environment, a physical environment and a social environment. And we need to make decisions that incorporate the realities and the complexities of those systems in which we operate. So thank you so much. You've really helped. Is there anything else you want to add? Any general statements or before we close up?
Well, yeah, let me just make a comment. I think that the effect of, call them potentially neurotoxic plastics on the brain, that is an area that needs urgent scientific research to understand what is it doing to the human brain, because we understand what it's doing to fish brains and rodent brains, and it's very concerning. So let's quickly get into understanding what it means for the human brain. That's and there are a couple of groups in the world working on that. I think a more advanced understanding that we have of toxic pollutant on the brain is air pollution, right? We know that air pollution is, where is it coming from? Well, it's coming from products like cars and other types of mechanized vehicles and mechanized, infrastructure in the world. Air pollution has a very bad effect on the brain. Air pollution is known now to affect particularly the developing brain up to the age of 5 years. It has a negative effect on brain development, the structure and architecture of the brain. But we also know that it is associated with the more rapid development of cognitive decline in older age. So that, air pollution is one example of, if you don't think about, say, the building and marketing of cars and mechanized vehicles, and then you don't think about the effect of the exhaust on the human brain, then you're just going to keep producing more combustion engines, and it's going to continue to have worse effects on the human brain. But if we were to think about the impact of air pollution from those products like cars, then we wouldn't perhaps be producing them quite as much. So if we can start to tune our thinking around neuroscience, I think we can get a lot of value for society.